Hello, everybody. Welcome to Post Wrestling's UFC 251 preview show. I am John Pollock, along with the big Phil combo himself, Phil Chairtalk, who is with me on this wonderful Thursday as we are 2 days out from UFC 251, the first of 4 cards in Abu Dhabi this month. How are you, Phil?
I'm great, John. I feel like I'm in Abu Dhabi right now. We are going through a blistering heat wave. It's that's been going on, I think 2 weeks now. And I'm upstairs and my air conditioning is working overtime.
This is Way really downplayed this the other night. Just, it's always hot in the summer. I feel this summer, these last 2 weeks, it has been excruciatingly hot. Like the humidity is like hitting like 40 plus Celsius here in the city. I mean, this is ungodly weather for me.
Oh yeah. I mean, I generally don't have too much problem with the heat. Like if I can go outside and I can be in the shade out during most temperatures. But I tried to go outside yesterday and, I couldn't last, 15 minutes. It was horrible.
It was a weird day on Wednesday. We had in between like scorching heat, we had a tornado watch in the middle. I lost power on Wednesday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had this, it was like before the heat wave, it felt like we had, the returning of an ice age. It was cold for a bunch of weeks as well. But we like to complain in Canada about the weather. So, we're representing.
I just like to let's get all our complaining out in 2020. Let's just, look at this entire year of all the faults that the world is, presenting, weather-wise, disease-wise. I mean, it's just all coming to a front in 2020.
Yeah, okay. So no more complaining. We'll just be satisfied and content going forward. Sure. I love it.
Well, how about this segue? Would you rather be fighting in Abu Dhabi in the middle of the day where it's currently something like 43 Celsius, or would you like to face the realistic outcome that these fighters have in that they will be fighting between 2 and 8 in the morning local time in Abu Dhabi?
So you're saying which is the worst scenario?
Would you rather be fighting at 5 in the morning local time, or would you rather be fighting at the middle of the day or a normal time where the heat would be that much more? Granted, they are indoors.
Well, yeah, I mean, anything to minimize the heat. I would say that the heat is something that you can't prepare for as easily as just a change in the hour of the day. So I think you can adapt to that fairly easily, but it's hard to replicate the atmosphere of a desert.
Yeah, it was a very funny clip because Ariel Helwani was interviewing Paige Vanzant, and this was only a week or so ago, and Ariel asked her about the main card starting at 6 a.m. local time, and this was news to Paige. She was not aware that her fight would be at about 6 in the morning, and this is like a week before she's heading to Abu Dhabi. I mean, this was quite the curveball to learn of during a media interview.
Yeah, you'd think that her management would have, just informed her of that little note. But hey, look, I think in general, life is going to be a little bit different for the people who are staying on Fight Island. So they're going to need to get used to all sorts of adaptations. We should have a bell for every time Fight Island is said during this show.
Well, I'm going to try and keep it low. I think the marketing of this thing's gone a little bit too intense. I mean, for Christ's sake, we're going to where the UFC 242 was last September. That's what's happening here.
Yeah, but if we think about it as sort of like, the UFC likes to put on these like tentpole events. It's not uncommon for the 4th of July one to be that. And there is all this hoopla surrounding the myth, this comical myth of Fight Island. And it is a really eagerly anticipated event. People are anxious to see these fights. People are anxious to see anything really in this pandemic where the UFC has been able to be the standout sport.
Yes. If you've seen the photos of the octagon on the beach, that is not what you're going to be seeing on Saturday when you tune into this card. They will be indoors, and it's a loaded card. This is, and one that's gotten, I would say, a pretty significant upgrade over the past several days, and that is a new main event with Kamaru Usman and Jorge Masvidal. What did you think about everything as it was coming together over the weekend, Phil, and what led to this main event? Did it surprise you that at the end of all of this, we had a main event involving Jorge Masvidal?
It didn't surprise me. I wouldn't say I saw it as like a sure thing. But the second I heard that Burns was out, Masvidal was the first name that popped to mind. Of course, with the caveat that the UFC better be willing to pay up. And I think it's not that Gilbert Burns. It's not like the main event of Gilbert Burns versus Kamaru Usman was going to be a big driver of pay-per-view buys. But I think the notion of this being a special event is something that the UFC wanted to preserve. And, maybe what Masvidal was asking for was reasonable enough that they were able to come to terms. I mean, clearly it was. Because it was so short notice, I definitely didn't say it was a likely outcome. But if you go on the Discord on I think the Friday or the Saturday, I had it pegged at plus 500 that it would happen, that Masvidal would step in, and it did. So I should have put my money down.
In terms of preparation for this fight, it seems like Masvidal, he had hardly just been sitting at home during this time. He's got, as of Saturday, he said he had 22 pounds to cut, and he is supremely confident that his style is going to work very well against Kamaru Usman. The last time we saw Kamaru Usman, might have been one of, I would say, the most entertaining fight Kamaru Usman's ever been a part of with the Colby Covington fight. But I think that Usman is still that fighter that is seeking that validation from fight fans in terms of how great a champion he is. And I think justifiably so, is a big favorite going into this fight, especially given the circumstances that this is someone who has been training for a 5-round fight. And Masvidal, confidence or not, you're getting ready for 5 rounds with Kamaru Usman. That's a giant task to take on a week's notice. Yeah.
I think, though, as you already mentioned, the idea that he's stepping in on a week's notice isn't a realistic depiction of the whole story, because he was preparing for Usman all year. It was the name that everybody anticipated. It was tied to this date before pandemic. And you saw through his social media videos that Masvidal was preparing specifically for Usman. He brought in Bo Nickel, who's like one of the top amateur wrestlers in America. And the fight only fell apart a month ago, really. So it's not like Usman had like a true training camp for Burns. And, Masvidal, being savvy, probably anticipated that this was something. So he stayed fit enough that he could step in there. And this 22 pounds, I know that sounds like a lot to people, but if he can get there on time, it really shouldn't be that big a deal for him to make weight.
No, unless there were extreme circumstances. I mean, it's a long flight over there, granted, but, there's quarantine periods thrown into this week. So this is kind of unlike prior empty arena cards that the UFC has been running, because the measures are that much more. So it's kind of hard to say if fighters are encountering more issues than normal when it comes to just focusing on cutting weight. But I don't foresee the weight being an issue this week. We'll find out on Friday. But nonetheless, I don't think that's going to play a major factor in this. For Jorge Masvidal, he really exercised his leverage. He was not going to take this fight for the terms that were offered to him, and thus Gilbert Burns slid right in there. And here the UFC was in a pinch, and suddenly his leverage grew, and he stated that he didn't get everything he wanted, but he got pretty close to it. And I think it becomes even more of an interesting case for Masvidal. He indicated that in agreeing to this, he had to agree to a long-term contract, but I think we're going to see Masvidal carry this out, and probably other fighters that I don't care how many fights are on my contract. If Masvidal wins this fight and you want to pair me with a Conor McGregor or a rematch or a Gilbert Burns, I'm going to want to get paid, and we're going to have a negotiation every single time you want me to fight.
Yeah, I mean, this is in many ways been the case for a lot of fighters. This has seemed to be sort of the Conor McGregor strategy. It seems like every single fight he has a new deal. And this is the case for pretty much
Nate Diaz would probably be in that category.
Yeah,
more guys exercising their power when they feel that they have the numbers to support them, and they're also willing to walk away, which is a key part as well.
Yeah, well, I think there's the two aspects to it. It's the numbers and the ability to walk away. Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal, Conor McGregor have all of those things. Somebody else that we want to talk about is John Jones. Mm-hmm. Now, John Jones may have the ability to walk away, but he doesn't quite have the numbers that the other names do. And so it's a delicate balancing act. Now, at the same time, John Jones can learn from this. If he's willing to hold out, and these types of as long as the pandemic is happening, fight cards are going to be booked on much shorter notice than they historically have been, because they're for two reasons. First of all, everybody's going day by day, and because there's no pressure of advanced ticket sales. So if you're a fighter and you want to hold out for a main event and a payday, you might need to be prepared to step in on a short notice, like Masvidal has done this week.
Yeah, and it's certainly like a game of chicken that these fighters are playing, because the UFC is at a point that, I think a lot of times when we assess these kind of moves, we always look at it that the UFC is in this, this big pressure point. It's like they were going to get the same amount of money from ESPN for this card, regardless of who the challenger was. It all comes down to the UFC and how incentivized they are to upgrade a fight. For this, they felt it was necessary to replace Gilbert Burns and meet Jorge Masvidal at least some of the way of what he was wanting. And it's an interesting message that it sends to other fighters that, it will, based on the UFC's wants, that's where you create your demand. And it's only going to be a very small number of fighters that can qualify for that kind of leverage. But more and more, I think you're going to see fighters that are going to try and experiment with this and see what they can get. But they have to have that ability to know that I'm going to walk away from a fight and I might not get booked for a fight for quite a while, at least not under the terms I want. So that's the game that's being played now among a select few.
Yeah, but the key is you do need those numbers. It's not just a straight check every time with ESPN. They have a base amount, but if the UFC does exceed targets, they both share in the profits of those, bonus pay-per-view points.
I don't know 100% if that is the case or not. I've heard contradictory to that.
It would strike me as antithetical to both parties to not be the case, because ESPN wants the UFC to be putting on, they want Conor McGregor on there, right? So if the UFC is not going to get a piece of the pay-per-view pie on Conor McGregor, then it doesn't, then they're not incentivized to use him on that particular event. We should probably figure it out. Either way, it is important that you need numbers, right? Because if you're just holding out and just saying you want more, but you can't give a clear value for you, then the UFC is not going to take you seriously.
And the UFC is in the business of fulfilling their deal to ESPN. And I mean, part of having this guarantee, like at least that what your ceiling or what the floor is going to be, that you can guarantee, you want ESPN to continue that distribution method for you. And I think that it comes with, the expectation that we are going to be putting together these big fights. And I think that ESPN, they play a big role in all of this. Anyway, that's kind of the makings of this main event. It's not coming together as though both have full out training camps, but what kind of fight are you expecting to see? And what did you take away from Usman's performance against Colby Covington? Because I think the narrative that this is just this grinding wrestler is somewhat of a false one because I don't think that Usman's striking gets enough credit. Conversely, I don't know if Masvidal's takedown defense and ability to last with Usman, if this goes to the ground, probably gets enough spotlight either.
Yeah, I agree on both those points. I mean, Usman's been training with Henry Hoof through his entire career, and that's one of the not only was he a premier kickboxer, but he's a premier MMA and kickboxing coach. And we've seen him raise his striking game. The Colby fight was interesting because there was more on the line in that fight than winning or losing. Like, it was clear that there was a mano-a-mano aspect to it. So it almost seemed like Usman was, even though he was, of course, supremely confident in his skills, he was willing to throw a little bit more caution to the wind in that one, just because that was his game plan for that. But I think in this fight, do I think he's got good striking skills? Yes. And they're underrated? Yes. But I don't think it would be wise to engage in the same type of battle that he did with Colby Covington in this one. I think if he wants the clearest way to win, it's through his wrestling. And then on the flip side of that, as you were talking about Masvidal, he has tremendous defensive wrestling. It's excellent. Now, is it good enough to keep Kamaru off of him enough that he can circle away and punish him on the feet? I don't know. That's the hard part. And I think that's why Kamaru is the significant favorite in this fight.
Yeah, I think this is a fight for Masvidal, that I think the first 2 rounds are going to be key for him. And conversely for Usman to not wear himself out, if he's struggling for the takedowns, and if he can't get them early, does he shy away from those, or does he exhaust himself continually going for takedowns? I think this could turn into a really fascinating fight. We could see this one go the entire 5 rounds. I think if someone is going to get stopped, it's going to be Usman. I think Masvidal, if he's going to lose, it's probably going to be a decision and just gets broken down by Usman over 5 rounds.
Yeah, that I generally have a similar assessment, to the point about, like, if a lot of it, I think, is going to come down to, it's not even so much if Usman can get the takedown. If he can press Masvidal up against the cage and work enough with the strikes to the body and knees that the referee doesn't move the position and Masvidal can't escape, he can do that for 100 rounds. We saw that against Tyron Woodley, and Tyron Woodley on paper is a better wrestler than Masvidal. So, so I think the path for Usman is fairly clear. I mean, it doesn't mean he can't win another way, but there's the A game.
What do you see being the most, for the UFC, the most advantageous outcome here? Because on the surface, you look at, okay, a Masvidal win here. There are so many huge fights that you can make, whether it is Conor McGregor coming up to 170, the rematch with Nate Diaz. But that comes with the UFC. I think that they are going to have to do business with Jorge Masvidal, and I think that he's going to play this game again. If you are the UFC, do you lean one way or the other of which Masvidal probably comes with more business collisions, but is also the guy that brings you tons of fights, or at least I would say 2 very big marquee ones. Yeah,
I think really you want Masvidal to win because it's just bigger marquee fights and they're sooner. Kamaru could end up being a big marquee draw down the line. I mean, he's incredibly charming individual. I mean, it's hard not to just melt when you see him with his daughter or even just talk about his daughter. So, he has star potential, not the same Masvidal type potential. But I think right now for the UFC and WME, the sooner the better. They want to make some money now. And I think Masvidal, he gets the W. As long as, they're generating a lot of buys, then I don't think they will have a problem at doing a deal with him for even bigger fights.
You think Masvidal fighting Nate Diaz or Conor McGregor, they would do either of those fights if you can't generate a live gate? Do you think that it's big enough that they would still try and push forward? Because it doesn't seem that they have had the indication to do anything with Conor McGregor because of that reason. But I mean, Masvidal McGregor, obviously that is a gigantic fight. And if you're looking at the big picture, do you just look at, hey, we're going to do enormous business on pay-per-view, that the live gate, it stings, but there's still a ton of revenue to be made from that fight?
This is sort of one of those scenarios where at some point you have to call it. The UFC, they wanted to potentially they were examining the possibility of fans being there for Stipe Cormier, and they bailed on that. And look, it's not, if, especially for Conor McGregor, if, a place like New Zealand or South Korea, a modern country that has, pretty much generally done a very good job of neutralizing the coronavirus, if those places are able to have spectator events, I could see the UFC putting on a massive event in a place like that where, people are already willing to travel. But at some point, if you don't think there's going to be fans for the foreseeable future, you do have to do something. Like Conor McGregor has a contract, like all the other UFC fighters, where he's owed 3 fights a year. Mm-hmm. So the UFC does have, now I'm sure, it seems like Conor's quieted down. I think the UFC spoke to him, or he came to realize that. Oh wait, he
retired, Phil. I forgot. He retired last month.
That's right.
What are we even talking about? I'm so sorry. I totally forgot about that till mid-sentence, that he had retired last month. That was the last we heard of him. And I guarantee you we're getting a Conor McGregor tweet, right around the decision being read on Saturday night.
I have no doubt that he will have some attempt to steal the spotlight.
His pattern is becoming very, very telltale. Like, it's very easy to read from the Conor McGregor book at this point and know what his playbook entails.
Yes. Now, to grant him a small amount of sympathy, he did seem like he was eager to get back on the track of things, right? Like he started the year right, but unfortunately coronavirus hit and he can't get in there. So I think had he been more active, we wouldn't be so consumed by his social media antics.
So it's a really fascinating main event. I will say though, of the main card, one that I don't even know how to break down this fight, because it's going to be very interesting to see what the preparation was like, how much stock you put into what Max Holloway has stated publicly about a lack of sparring and just working on Zoom with his coaches.
None.
You think it's all gamesmanship?
I mean, I don't think he had optimal training, but he's been training with bodies. I guarantee you.
Yeah, and it's been very serious in Hawaii when it comes to gyms being shut down, that I don't know if he wants to necessarily implicate himself if he has been training in gyms. It's really hard to imagine him preparing for this championship fight, accepting this fight, and hanging out on Zoom, doing shadow boxing.
Yeah, and maybe he also just, maybe it's the example he wants to set too. Maybe he just, wants to make sure that his fans think he takes it seriously, or maybe he's just having fun with the media and everybody else. It's hard to read. I guess that's what makes it entertaining.
So it's Alexander Volkanovski defending his featherweight title for the first time against a man who he beat for the title last December. And both him and Kamaru Usman riding their win streaks into this card. Both of their win streaks began on the very same night, Phil, in December of 2013. How crazy is that?
That's wild. Were they on the same card, I guess?
It was not on the same card. No.
Oh, really?
It was both of their win streaks started pre-UFC.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So cool. Volkanovski is coming into this fight having won 18 straight fights, unbeaten in the UFC. Their fight last December, Volkanovski winning by unanimous decision on scores of 50-45, 48-47, 48-47. I think most clearly had Volkanovski winning that fight. This was not some controversial outcome, but the rematch, I mean, this is one of those fights where, I mean, if they fought 10 times, are they going to split them in half? I don't really know, but I think with Alexander Volkanovski, he's going to have to prove me wrong, because I thought he put forward a great game plan in terms of, confusing Max Holloway and being able to showcase over 25 minutes why he was the better fighter. This was not, just catching him in the first round and we're going to run this back. This was a pretty strong win for Alexander Volkanovski. But what kind of Max Holloway do you expect here in this rematch?
That is the key question. I think, Volkanovski's performance was terrific in the first fight. I think we should expect more of the same plus better. And, in the case of Max, maybe we'll see that. It's hard to tell. Because in the first fight, he was able to make adjustments mid-fight, and gain ground in the later rounds.
Yes.
So that does give me confidence that he will approach this fight differently. Now, at the same time, I've heard him in some interviews comment that, he sort of dismissed the leg kicks that were such a factor in the first fight. And it's like, okay, are you dismissing them because you have a strategy to deal with them? Or are you dismissing them just because you say they didn't bother you? So if the approach involves tactical change, I'm really curious to see what he can offer. I definitely don't have it set in stone that the champion is going to defend his title on this one, even though he looked so strong in the first fight.
Yeah, Max Holloway, it's very hard to see because he is someone that you can see big changes fight to fight and how he adjusts to this one. I'm very curious to see. This would not be a fight I would be touching if I was someone that was prone to gamble on fights, because I think even under the best circumstances, it would be hard to predict what kind of Max Holloway we'll see here. And given everything that's going on with these training camps, who's to say what we're going to see? This one, I really don't have a great read on this fight at all. I think it could go either way. I would say Max Holloway, a loss here. What does that happen to Max Holloway in the featherweight division if he's down two losses to the current champion?
Well, it certainly puts him in a bind for going after a title shot at that division so quickly. But there's so many contenders in the division. It's not inconceivable that somebody else steps in. Max is an incredibly popular fighter. He's one of the most popular fighters in the UFC. He's not like elite superstar, but of the people that are sort of just below that tier, he's right up there. He still has opportunities at 155 as well. Like I know people wrote off that Dustin Poirier loss, saying that he was small for that fight. But yeah, that was his first fight at 155. And he had moments in that fight. It was competitive. He lost. And he's still fairly young. And if you look at Dustin Poirier, he didn't do great when he first went up to 155, and now he's the cream of the crop there. So even with the loss, I think there's still a ton of options for Holloway.
Vacant bantamweight title. Henry Cejudo has left the division, left the sport. So
he's at the same home as Conor McGregor.
That's it. All these fighters, they're retired for life. We'll never see them come back. So it's Jose Aldo fighting Piotr Jan. Jan is unbeaten in the UFC. He has gone 6-0, coming off his most recent wins over John Dodson, Jimmy Rivera, and Uriah Faber. Given those list of opponents, like Jan has looked fantastic, and you can only beat the guys that are put in front of you, and he has passed them all with flying colors. That said, are you expecting this to be his toughest challenge in Jose Aldo?
On paper, it should be his toughest challenge. I think the fight with Jimmy Rivera, looking back on it, was very impressive. Not because it was the most thrilling fight, but just the level of patience and precision that he was able to show in that fight. Yes, Aldo should be his toughest. I mean, Aldo's fought the cream of the crop at 145 and now at 135. The one question, though, is yes, Jose Aldo made featherweight or bantamweight before, but he made so at 136, and this fight is going to be at 135. And 1 pound might not sound a lot to people, but I'm still not sold on Jose Aldo at this in this division. So I'm curious what's going to come from the weight cut.
Yeah, I mean, we saw him make it once. I mean, he doesn't get the 1 pound allowance this time. Yeah, it's really hard to see. Like I'm favoring Jan in this fight, but I don't discount Jose Aldo. I think that if we get a Jose Aldo performance like Marlon Moraes, I think Jan is at least going to face pressure that he probably hasn't to this level. But Aldo at the same time, he's 33, but the man has been through a lot of fights, at the age of 33 as well. So this to me is a very big crossroads fight for Jose Aldo. Of everybody here on this card, it's two distinct pathways that he could go. A win, what a story that comes out of this, of him winning a championship at a different weight class. A loss, and I don't know what Jose Aldo is looking at, because this is, in theory, going to be his last opportunity at a UFC championship. So, to me, the most on the line is on Jose Aldo's shoulders on Saturday.
I don't know. You never know. He could lose another number one contenders match.
That's right. Never discount that, folks. Maybe it'll be a swerve and he could lose this fight. And Dana says it was a real close decision. We're awarding this to Jose Aldo. I am invoking my promoter's license because I run Fight Island and I am the fourth judge. So you're right. I should not make such grand statements as the last championship ever for Jose Aldo. But I'm interested to see this. Like Jan, I think that sometimes we just default to he should run through Jose Aldo. I'm not expecting that. I think that he will face a test here, and we'll probably learn a lot more about Petr Yan, because I don't know, Jimmy Rivera, probably the toughest opponent he's fought. I think Uriah Faber, certainly this was not the Uriah Faber of 10 years ago that he beat. So Jose Aldo is probably, for most, past that prime of his career, but not to the extent where he's any kind of pushover to me.
No, not at all. And look, we mock the Marias fight, but you can make a case that he won the fight. And he did look good in that fight despite the weight cutting. So, maybe 135 is the home for him, and maybe he is good enough to be a champion. And just like you said, it would be a tremendous story. It would put him at an even higher level of what's already a Hall of Fame career.
The main card rounds out with two women's fights at 115 pounds. It's a rematch from UFC 237 with Rose Namajunas fighting Jessica Andrade, both former 115-pound champions. In that fight, it was such a strange fight because I thought it was maybe the best round I've ever seen from Rose Namajunas in the first round. And then the second, she gets knocked out with this slam, and Jessica Andrade wins the fight and then loses it in her first defense to Zhang Weili later in the year. And this rematch, we haven't seen Rose Namajunas since that fight over a year ago. And you would think that, on paper, it was a pretty impressive knockout from Andrade, but I mean, Namajunas was lighting her up in that first round, and I thought she was looking fantastic up until the finish.
Yeah, she was, and the whole thing with the finish was, she'd taken that slam in the first round, so it was like when the second one came around, it was like, oh well, I already took this; it's not going to be a big deal, and yeah, it put her out. But as you said, she was looking tremendous. Always a lot of questions going into a Rose fight. She's somebody who wears her heart on her sleeve, and she does that in the public space as well. So, you always wonder how people deal with all of their emotions. Fighting is already hard enough, and then when people have like all these personal things going on, and then there's these whole social things going on. But that's sort of been the story of her career. So, I kind of anticipate her to fight at her best, even with all these issues that she's dealing with.
Do you think a title fight is at stake for the winner of this fight?
I think there's a title fight at stake for Rose.
Yeah.
I don't think that, it's not inconceivable that Jessica gets put into a title fight again, but I think they really want to do that Rose fight. That has the potential to be a really big fight, I think. And, so they want her to win.
Yeah, I could see certainly, the next championship fight for Zhang Weili being if Rose wins this fight, or they run back the rematch with Joanna again, because I think that's a rematch they can go to, whenever they want to. And I don't think people would be upset with giving people the fight of the year in a rematch.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right, and then we'll touch on the last fight, which is the last fight on her current UFC deal. Paige VanZant against Amanda Ribas at 115 pounds. And, most are looking at this as a tough opponent being thrown at VanZant in this last fight, where I think most are expecting that VanZant will, at the very least, be testing out free agency, and probably a good chance that this is her swan song in the UFC.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough opponent, but I think people underrate Paige VanZant a little bit.
I do too.
She's one of these, she got thrown to the wolves. She got there was one fight they put her in there against somebody
Rose.
she had no business. Yeah, that was pretty bad. But she hung in there and she showed a lot of toughness in that fight. I wouldn't be surprised if she gets the win. She's still young. She's clearly, people criticize her for making money on Instagram or something, but she's clearly committed to the sport of MMA. It's not like her primary, it's not like a pastime, for her. So, win or lose, I think she'll still, I want to say she'll do well going to Bellator, but is Bellator even a thing? Like, are they going to have events? Like, what's going on?
I mean, they'll be back. I think that for Paige, I think she'd get a good offer from Bellator. There's a big fight to be made with her and Ilima-Lei Macfarlane that I think would do well under normal circumstances. And I think Bellator is desperate to put on any kind of fights that are going to grab some publicity for them. Cause Bellator to me has taken several steps back when it comes to just the general fight fan and their awareness level. Like, to me, Bellator just seems like a distant, and this is even before the pandemic hit, that I just feel that being on the Paramount Network and on DAZN, that's not a straight gateway to be on the radar for most fight fans.
I agree. I mean, look, and you also have the strategy of holding a lot of events in these sort of like, places that don't really draw a lot of eyeballs. Italy, Israel,
Thackerville, Oklahoma.
Now, me saying, hey, what's going on with Bellator? Like, I don't mean to be dismissive. It's a pandemic, and maybe a subject for a different day is, the UFC, in order to even put on these events, has to incur great expense, for testing and all sorts of procedures. How many promotions can even incur those costs? And, sort of talking about, fighters, like Bellator has similar contracts to the UFC where fighters are owed a certain amount of fights per year. And so if you are a free agent and you're skeptical about a promotion's viability, that changes things. And so like, I don't have the answer to any of these things. It's just, it's the nature of, this pandemic business.
Phil is going to have 48 hours to have all the answers to all of MMA's questions Saturday night. So tune in to our post show for all of that. We'll answer everything, every single problem, that's affecting fighters. We'll have solutions.
Well, no, I think it's just, we'll just play armchair quarterback. We'll just criticize others from a distance. How does that sound? I like that.
That's what we do. I think this main card is dynamite. I think this is totally worth the amount that a pay-per-view goes for in the UFC. When you're looking at the undercard, I think you really kind of need a magnifying glass to point out, things to look out for. Some highlights, Volkan Ozdemir against, Yuri Prochazka, who's a light heavyweight coming over from Ryzen. I think that's a very intriguing fight with a guy that could be a real player at 205 pounds in Prochazka. Makwan Amirkhani is back fighting Danny Henry. I think that the hype train of Makwan Amirkhani has stalled out the last few years, but at one point had, I think, a lot of focus on him. He will be back, as will in the opening fight on Fight Pass, Davey Grant, the winner of Tough back in 2013. He's quietly returning here for a fight with Martin Day. I don't have too much to add to these 8 fights on the undercard, Phil. Maybe some fights will be really entertaining affairs. I'm not saying they're going to be bad fights, but I would say that 95% of the attention deserves to be on the main card in the days leading up to UFC 251.
Yeah, I mean, 3 title fights, all the attention in the world. I mean, you can maybe argue 4 title fights with the BMF title being unofficially on the line. Yeah, but underneath it, not too much, as you mentioned, Ozdemir, couple of Santoses, Dos Santos and Leonardo Santos fighting. But yeah, it's pretty much, people are tuning in for the pay-per-view portion of this event. And it's a really good looking main card.
How many, what would you have pegged this card to be? Let's take the interest level for the Gaethje Ferguson fight, because we don't know what 250 did last month. But 249 with Gaethje and Ferguson reportedly did about 700,000 buys. What would you have pegged this card to have done with Gilbert Burns, and how much more is it doing with the new main event?
I could see it being in a similar, like 700,000 buys under the old one. I mean, maybe on the lower end, 500,000 to 700,000. Like this, Fight Island has become this talking point on its own. You have Max Holloway, who we've already talked about, is a draw and has been on pay-per-views that have done very well. Jose Aldo has been on pay-per-views that have done very well. And Jorge we'll get to now Jorge Masvidal, but I think the anticipation for the event and the stacked card, and the fact that there really is nothing else on in North America sports-wise, was going to set this up to be a big event. And now with Masvidal stepping in on 1 week notice and adding to all of that, I think this could be 1 million. It wouldn't shock me. Like there's been a lot of attention around it. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think 1 million is ambitious. I see this one kind of at the level of Ferguson and Gaethje. But during this period, it's like that card with Ferguson and Gaethje greatly exceeded my expectations. So I think that there is that factor that when the UFC has a pretty big card, it's like the ceiling it seems to be that much higher for how they perform on pay-per-view. And this might be one that exceeds my expectations as well. So, that's an interesting part, but certainly I think in, that much more focus after Masvidal was added to this card. So we've also got a rare two-man booth on Saturday. It's going to be John Anik and Michael Bisping for the whole show because Paul Felder is quarantining himself. He tested negative for the virus, but was on a plane next to Dean Thomas, who apparently has the virus, so he has not been flown to Abu Dhabi. So two voices on Saturday night.
Yeah, I've got no problem with that. I've actually really enjoyed Michael Bisping being added to the broadcast team. I think he does a tremendous job. He maybe is a little bit too much of a bully to some of his commentating partners, but it's mostly harmless in a mostly harmless fashion. So I don't mind that. I mean, Paul Felder, I do like having him on the call, but obviously better safe than sorry. Poor Paul Felder, he's had quite a bit of bad luck with a bunch of things. But I'm sure that he'll get an opportunity to get on some calls back when the UFC returns to the Apex. And hopefully he can get a big marquee fight because it seems like he wants to fight. And I think the fans really want to see him get in there.
And final thing, Saturday night, why don't you lay out for our listeners the coverage that we have scheduled? I'm going to be covering the card on the website, but where can our listeners tune in to Phil and our man Eric Marcotte?
Yes, myself and Eric Marcotte are going to be streaming live along with the pay-per-view portion of the show. So at 10 p.m. Eastern time on the Post Wrestling YouTube channel, we'll be going live with a watch along where we'll be giving our analysis and commentary of the fights. And if you can chat along in the YouTube chat, but also we'll be chatting on Discord. And if you want to join us via the voice channel, you can do so. So we've got a voice channel set up in Discord where you can hop on during the stream and chat with us about the fights, what you're looking forward to, what you've already watched. And then immediately following the pay-per-view, you and I, as we've already discussed, will be doing the post show and we'll be doing it live again from the YouTube channel. And we'll also be taking calls via the Discord. So maybe if you want to get into the Discord early during the watch along, get practice at getting in the voice channel and comfortable with talking to some of the other postmarks in there. And then when the post show goes live and we're ready to take calls, you'll be there in Discord, ready to talk to us.
So the best thing to do, go to youtube.com/postwrestling, subscribe to the channel. So then you'll get your notifications when we're going live. You can follow along with Phil and Eric beginning at 10 Eastern time. And the Discord channel, just go to postwrestling.com. Right there on the buttons is a link to send you to the Discord, and you can get all set for a whole night of UFC 251 coverage with the crew at Post Wrestling. It should be a lot of fun, and I'm excited to take calls through the Discord chat.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk to the fans. Always great to hear other people's takes. We had a new person join the Discord the other day, Chris 22. He had some awesome takes on his thoughts on Usman versus Masvidal. He's really excited to see Rose versus Jessica too. So yeah, there's a lot of people talking about this card, and we'll be having a really good time on Saturday night. And
final thing, please let all the listeners know about your burgeoning podcast that you have launched to great fanfare. It's just growing by leaps and bounds. I don't think you can contain it in the fishbowl much longer. Please tell us about the podcast, Phil.
Thank you, John. Yes, the fishbowl is getting crammed. We may need to upgrade to an aquarium soon. So I have my own podcast, not typically related to the world of mixed martial arts. It's called the Fishbulb Podcast. But my latest episode is slightly related in that I speak to Elliot Bayev. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and competitor, and he's also the owner of the Open Mat family of mixed martial arts schools. And so we talk about that. He's also your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach and Way's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach.
Yes.
And we talk about martial arts, but we also talk about some of the struggles in business that he's had. And he's also looking to do sort of more I guess you could say philanthropic type work. And so we talk about that as well. And it's also the first video edition of the show. So if you want to see what Elliot has to say, you can visit the Fishbowl Podcast on YouTube. But if you prefer to listen to it, you can get it anywhere you get your podcasts.
Yeah, it's a really great show. I would recommend checking it out. Even if you don't study jiu-jitsu, I think it's just a really interesting discussion about one guy's kind of life's journey and how jiu-jitsu intersects with it. So I highly recommend the podcast.
Thanks, John.
And Phil did not put me up to that at all. I listened to it and I messaged you on my own to tell you what a great job you did with this interview, Phil. I want you to take a compliment. Praise? I want you to say, goddamn right, Pollock. I know what I'm doing. I've got this shit on lock.
It sounded more like you wanted me to give you praise for giving me praise.
Of course. I want my own pat on the back. I'm doing such a great service promoting your show to the masses, Phil. So absolutely put the spotlight on me. I have not been invited onto Phil's podcast yet. We're trying to work on that at some point. Phil has told me, I've got a standard. Keep working, kid. One day you might get that invite.
It's interesting because I'm pretty sure we have an official record that does clearly show that you were invited to the podcast, but I don't know. Maybe somebody can dig up those rare recordings.
I don't know. It's a lot of, we'll see. I don't know. Your people can talk to my people kind of thing. So I don't think we could put a concrete offer, is out there in the universe, but nonetheless.
I see, John, that you come from the Jorge Masvidal school of negotiations. I see what's going on here. Okay.
Well, you're really just playing promoter here, and I know when you're in a pinch, you'll come rectify the bridge with John Pollock. So we will see.
That's the truth. That's the most honest thing we've said in the last couple of minutes.
Yes. Well, a podcast between the two of us on your platform, super necessary, the folks would say. So that is it for us. We'll be back on Saturday night. Once again, log in Post Wrestling, youtube.com/Post Wrestling, 10 Eastern when the pay-per-view begins with Phil and Eric, and then I'll be on for the post show after the main card concludes. So that is it for us. Thank you for listening to our preview show, and goodbye.